Good morning on this Sunday, August 2nd, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. 3 former presidents and other dignitaries come together to celebrate the life and legacy of Congressman John Lewis. Another loss for Georgia as former presidential candidate Herman Cain loses his fight with the virus. And new poll numbers show tight presidential and U.S. Senate races here in Georgia. Theron, Phil, Janelle, and Kathy are all here joining us from their homes. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
From Alabama to Washington to Georgia, it was a week of tributes to Congressman John Lewis as America bid farewell to the civil rights leader.
He was a good and kind and gentle man. And he believed in us, even when we don't believe in ourselves.
We live in a better and nobler country today because of John Lewis.
If God came to me tonight and said, okay, your time's up, you got to go home, one thing, what would it be? I said, I would infect every American with whatever it was that John Lewis got as a 4-year-old kid and took through a lifetime.
On Inauguration Day in 2009, he was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand. And I told him, this is your day too.
Congressman Lewis left us with his final words, an essay he wrote shortly before his death that was released on the day of his funeral. Theron, you cannot read that essay without tearing up, and you were at the events this week, so give us your perspective.
Well, let's just start off in Alabama, which was a wonderful tribute to him. To see the scene of him going back to Troy, Troy University, and then going to Selma, and then the crossing of the bridge with the rose petal on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where he shared a lot of blood that day. And then, big shout out to Speaker Pelosi and how she was able to just pull together all members of the Congress together, the rotunda. I was there for that. And then the roughly almost 4-hour funeral this week was a celebration. It was a great tribute to a great man. And I thought all 3 former presidents and all their speakers did a phenomenal job of honoring Congressman Lewis. But the letter, Lori, was something that I got to give the committee to celebrate Congressman John Lewis's life. His chief of staff, Michael Collins, his former communications director, Brenda Jones. That was something that they wanted the country to know, that that's truly how Congressman Lewis felt. Those were the things that we talked about in his final days. And the last thing is, he's passing the torch. He's encouraging young people to get involved, to continue to fight for civil rights, for criminal justice reform, for equal rights. And so I thought it was a wonderful week of tributes to him, and I just want to thank everyone who took time out to pay him some respect this week.
Phil, former President Bush and Congressman Lewis disagreed on so many political fronts, but I thought, the former president gave such a heartfelt speech.
Well, I think the former President Bush did give a great speech. I think it was a tribute to what it should be, a celebration of life. I thought Bill Clinton had great remarks. I think former President Obama got off to a good start and unfortunately got derailed, though. I'm old school. I believe a funeral should be a celebration of life and not devolve into political attacks like Obama did. I think that was disrespectful to the family. But I agree with Theron. It was a good celebration there at the Edmund Pettus Bridge over in Alabama, because it was in 1965 on that bridge that I think that day when the troopers of Alabama attacked the peaceful protesters, that was the day that legal segregation really died and the stake was put into it. It's a historical landmark for the country, and that was rightly the focus in a lot of those tributes, but it was a shame that it was marred by Obama.
Well, Janelle, so many of the speakers, of course, did mention voting rights and the need to carry on Congressman Lewis's legacy. That's part of what he was as a politician, so you can't really not mention that during his funeral.
Yeah, you know
I agree,
what? So
but you didn't have
here's
to
my take.
attack the administration, no.
All right, Janelle, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I actually agree with Phil 100%. I did feel like there was a bit of a disconnect. You know, whenever President Obama speaks, he's a great speaker. And, you know, he mentioned Bull Connor. He mentioned George Wallace, both Democrats. He mentioned the attacks on, he attacked the notion of bringing federal agents into these cities. And he did the same thing for Ferguson. And then I just look at him and I'm like, you're a black man who was born of an immigrant father, who was raised by a single mother, went on to Harvard Law School, met your black wife in Harvard Law School as well, became the most powerful couple in the world, brought out as many black people, more black people to the polls than we've ever seen in history. Yet we continue to talk about oppression and continue to talk about voter suppression. And what I would love to see is that for him to show us what he did. How did he overcome these things in order to achieve so many levels of success? So I felt like that's where my disconnect lies oftentimes when it comes to President Obama. But overall, I do want to make a comment really quickly about the letter. I felt like John Lewis's letter was amazing. It was awesome. It really touched me because I feel like it really was a depiction of how far we come. Today we have cases like George Floyd that brought together so many people, black and white. So the level of people who are seeing these things as injustices has risen since those times back in the day. And I really think that I attribute all of that to Congressman Lewis and so many others like Bob Brown, Ruth Washington, and C.T. Vivian, and just so many others. So I thought that the letter was awesome.
Kathy, I do want to expand on this letter, on this essay. Congressman Lewis said, quote, "In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the most excellent way." Considering, you know, really the last few months in this country with protests that have turned violent, how important is that message today to the younger generations?
I think it's really important, and I think, you know, I guess I had always hoped this day would never come, right? You know, the thought of not having John Lewis as a leader in our Congress, you know, was one I wasn't willing to entertain, and so it's hard to think about him not being here. But I thought the letter was just so perfect, you know, just such a way to summarize and capture what he was all about in his own words. But I think that the principle of nonviolence is such an important principle for organizing a political strategy, and I'm really glad that he emphasized that. I hope younger people think about that, and I hope people study the impact that the sacrifice it takes to be nonviolent, right? You know, it's easy to lash out. It's easy to be ugly. It's easy to destroy things. It's much, much harder to have the discipline to endure that and then make your point. And I think that's what the civil rights movement did so incredibly beautifully and so consistently. And I hope that young people today understand the meaning and the elegance of political movement in nonviolence.
Really good point. And Theron, I want to end this block with you because Congressman Lewis was one of your greatest mentors. What do you think young people should remember about the way he and his fellow civil rights leaders fought for what they believed in?
I think the one thing I would like to say, Lori, is that Congressman Lewis supports and supported Black Lives Matter. He supported this movement. He believed in the peaceful protests. And I want to say that for him because unfortunately, due to his physical conditions, he couldn't really get out there and speak to the young people. But I want them to know that he really wanted to show them a great deal of solidarity. And really the letter, I think, depicted a lot of what he wanted to say. But at the end of the day, Lori, after just a long emotional week, I think if we truly want to honor Congressman Lewis and all the panelists, we've said really nice things about him, is that now it's going to be up to us to actually make sure that we do the work and that our actions back up our words.
All right, it is hard to talk about him in the past tense. Thank you all so much. Coming up, the man who wore so many hats, presidential contender, radio host, CEO, loses his fight with the coronavirus. We'll remember the life of Herman Cain coming up.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
It has been a tough couple of weeks on this show, remembering several men who have made a difference in Georgia and across the nation. This week, we learned former presidential candidate Herman Cain died from COVID-19. Phil, let's begin with you. This man could command a room and had such a giant personality.
Well, that's right, Lori. That's well said. Herman Cain was my friend for about 20 years, and when I came to Atlanta to head the Southeastern Legal Foundation, he became a supporter, and we got to know one another and would see each other at events and spoke at various places over the years together. And he had a great personality, and as you said earlier, he wore many hats. My goodness, he was a Morehouse graduate, majoring in mathematics, so business came to him very easily, and of course became CEO of Godfather's Pizza and really turned that company around. And he was a minister and a radio broadcaster. You know, Martha Zoller, who used to be on the Georgia Gang, gave him a guest host slot when she had a few days off, and that's how he got his start, and of course was on WSB radio, and ran, of course, for president in 2012 as Georgia's most prominent Republican. And I think you could go on with such a storied life, but I think we all know someone in life who's just a nice person, and that was Herman Cain. And he did show that conservatism, political conservatism, can be embraced by anybody, any American, regardless of their ethnicity. And he rejected that America was infected with systemic racism. That's the lie of the left that Herman Cain so effectively exposed. And his life story was kind of a tribute to that. He always said he worked hard, and that's how he got ahead. And he always railed against big government, big taxes, and so I can still see him smiling as this election debate continues.
I can still see him saying shucky ducky, right? Janelle, I want to turn to you because I was disappointed to see how cruel people were on social media about Herman Cain's death. I mean, some of them saying that's what you get for going to a Trump rally without a mask. We were just talking about this last block about mixing politics in these farewells.
Yeah, so Herman Cain was the epitome of personal responsibility. He, to me, is what, he exemplified living a life of his choosing. Let's be clear, the people that are sharing this picture and talking about this are people who didn't know him, and that's really apparent based on their reactions. He knew that he was a part of that vulnerable population, the population that both the president, along with everyone else, has been saying from the very beginning that needed to, take extra precautions. But he chose to live the life of his choosing and do what he wanted to do. He was there because he wanted to be there. No one knows if that's where he actually contracted COVID-19 or not. But the fact of the matter is, for some of us, we believe that this earth is not our final resting place, and we choose to live our lives the way we want to because it's about having that choice to make your own decisions. And that's what he did. He lived a life that was awesome. He was an encouragement to many of us as Black conservatives to speak out and to stand strong on our own personal convictions, and that's what he did. And I think he would be there regardless of the outcome because he knows this is not his final resting place.
Good point, Janelle. Theron, I want to switch gears now and let's go to politics. A new Monmouth poll out this week shows a tight presidential race in Georgia. Both President Trump and Democrat Joe Biden are tied at 47% each. Theron, you were just named to Biden's team. What do you think about these numbers? Because we've seen them here before.
Yeah, Lori, I was very honored to be named this week as a senior advisor, one of the senior advisors for the Biden for Georgia campaign. So it's a great team that we announced this week. I would say that the polls is a direct reflection of what I've been hearing all across the state of Georgia, really for the last 6 to 8 months. And that is that the president's numbers are very, very bad right now, and he's unpopular. However, he is the incumbent. And so I think what the Biden campaign realizes is that now Georgia is on the electoral map to 270 electoral votes, which we need to defeat President Trump. And so again, I think the poll numbers are a direct reflection that people right now are sort of on both sides. They're in a dead heat. The battle is in the middle, and we got to do our job to make sure that we not only tell people why they shouldn't vote for Donald Trump, but we got to make sure in Georgia we give people a reason to vote for Biden. I think that we'll be able to do that.
Kathy, I want to bring you in because that same poll shows that Senator David Perdue has a 6-point lead over Jon Ossoff, 49-43, 7% undecided, and the money is just pouring into this race.
Well, there's going to be a lot of money in Georgia this year because there is so much at stake, and we've talked about that before, but having 2 Senate seats open is not something that normally happens, and so you're going to see a lot of cash thrown at both of those campaigns. But if you compare the numbers in the presidential polling and then on the Senate side, you can see that people have kind of hardened up on, voters that are kind of have party allegiance have gotten to where, they know who their presidential candidate is. There's a fight over that 3%. But on the Senate side, I think it's still wide open. I think the Senate candidates all have to make their case for why voters should be with them. And because there's always a little drop off every vote you go down the poll. And so I think we've got a little ways to go. But I think that no one should look at polls today and think that that's what the polls are going to say in November.
I agree. Janelle, you're the honorary co-chair for the Loeffler campaign. You're also featured in Senator Perdue's ad this week. We saw Senator Loeffler attack Doug Collins for when he was a defense attorney, saying essentially he protected criminals rather than protecting the safety of Georgians. Is that a valid accusation? Is that fair?
You know what? I think the commercial is definitely left up to interpretation because I know for me personally, when I looked at his record, the thing that stood out to me the most is that he showed a lot of compassion towards these type of individuals. And I know that's his job, and as a defense attorney, that's what you're supposed to do. But when it doesn't translate into your political standings as well, it's when it comes a bit of a disconnect too. And what I mean by that is that he didn't speak up a lot about the Ahmaud Arbery case or the George Floyd case. And I feel like his compassion seems to lean in the wrong directions sometimes. So that was my personal interpretation, but I think it's just left up to the person who's viewing it.
Theron, weigh in real quickly.
I think, again, it's a race to the right. And I think that, you see Senator Loeffler definitely trying to shore up her conservative votes. And I think that the Collins campaign are going to look at the poll numbers to see if and when they need to respond to this ad. But I do think you'll see him continue to try to promote his conservative values and his support of President Trump.
All right. Thank you, panel. Coming up, Governor Kemp and Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms are now negotiating over coronavirus restrictions. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
This week, Governor Kemp withdrew his request for an emergency injunction against the city of Atlanta's coronavirus restrictions, including a mask mandate. But the governor has not dropped his lawsuit against the city. And Phil, I'll start with you. Any insight here? Because we're also learning that the governor is opening up the Georgia World Congress Center next week to take COVID-19 patients. So, things are really getting worse.
Well, a couple points to these news developments. Number one, and I think it gets forgotten in all too many quarters, with the Kemp versus Bottoms court fight now, the big point wasn't really masks, although that was obviously part of it, but the big point was the fact that the governor did not want the city of Atlanta to go back to what they call phase one and shut down businesses. And in the governor's statements, he pointed out that all the hospital CEOs that he talked with and restaurant owners and business owners, big and small, opposed what Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms was trying to do. I think it's a delicate balance that we've all discussed here. You do need to have the reopening and keep our economy humming and keep people in their jobs, while at the same time you can still practice safety precautions, go with CDC guidelines while you're reopening. And so I think Mayor Bottoms lost some points there with a lot of people, especially business people and medical people. And I am glad, though, Lori, to hear the news about the World Congress Center being used for patients. We've always said on this show that we've got to watch for hospitalizations when it comes to COVID, and it's good to know that it's reopened again and that patients can go there.
Theron, weigh in on Phil's comments. I know that you're close with the mayor. Do you have any insight as to how the negotiations are going?
I really don't have a tremendous amount of insight. I will tell you that the two of them were together this week at the state capitol when we honored Congressman John Lewis, and the governor was so gracious to allow the congressman to lie in state there. And so I don't know what happened in that conversation, but I do think it was a good faith move on behalf of the governor to withdraw the emergency injunction motion. And so I think that sort of opened the door to really have more mediation. And hopefully at the end of the day, I said this last week, Georgia is at its finest when you have the governor and the mayor working together. And I do think the mayor has a really big case on her side. She wants to protect Atlantans. She wants to make sure that people are wearing masks, but also the governor's got a legal argument that he's going to be able to make. But ultimately, I think the two leaders will come together next week and we'll put this behind us.
Kathy, this week we saw another rural hospital in Georgia announce it will be closing soon. This time at Southwest Georgia Regional Medical Center in Randolph County. I mean, it had been struggling for years financially, but then COVID-19 came and that was it. So you've supported full Medicaid expansion for years. But if that's not happening anytime soon, what can rural hospitals do to stay open?
I don't know. I mean, they're going to have to get supplemental income from the state and from the federal government to be able to do it. A lot of the hospitals got a good chunk of money in the last package from Washington. I don't know if they're going to be getting it again for the next one. I don't think anybody in the first go round was anticipating that we'd be where we are. And the government, the federal government, and the state's response to this disease has been disastrous. And I think we're going to approach that 250 million death mark by November that was projected at the earliest part of this epidemic. But the failure to expand Medicaid and allow these hospitals to get insurance payments to cover the people that are uninsured in their areas hits the hardest in Randolph County, in these rural areas where you don't have people who have jobs that get their insurance from those jobs. So it's rural Georgia that suffers the most from this. At the last projection at the beginning of the year, it was 500,000 people. I think it's about 500,000 people. It's probably about 700,000 people right now that have lost their insurance and that would qualify. And this just needs to be done. It doesn't make economic sense, and it doesn't make ethical sense,
Janelle,
to forego this for political reasons.
Janelle, I want to go over to you. Does this strengthen the argument for proponents of full Medicaid expansion when you have, this is the Republican base in rural Georgia, and another hospital closing?
I don't think it does. I think at the end of the day, yes, we need to make sure we pay attention to the cries of our rural Georgia individuals, because I do think sometimes it gets a little pushed into the shadows. But I don't necessarily want to politicize this particular situation. At the end of the day, this is about making sure that we are not only providing opportunities in healthcare to rural Georgia, but we are also taking consideration that if a hospital is not being utilized to full capacity, that's something we have to consider as well. It's like the conundrum from hell, to be honest. So I really think that we have to pay attention to this. I really do feel like there are other options that we can explore besides, creating more and more debt.
All right, thank you, panel. Well, coming up, we will have winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Okay, we'll start with Phil this week. Phil, you're up.
Thanks, Lori. I've got a winner, and it's really some good news. We need some of that these days. It's the lottery, the Georgia Lottery, and its CEO Gretchen Corbin and her team. They put in $1.2 billion into the coffers to help the Hope Scholarship and the pre-kindergarten. So that's good news. And again, on the corruption front in the city of Atlanta, you've got City Councilman Antonio Brown indicted by the U.S. Attorney B.J. Pack for all sorts of fraud counts. It's just, again, this is a disgrace.
Janelle, over to you.
Okay, well, my first winner is obviously Herman Cain in the passing of him. I'm so grateful for his contribution, just exemplifying confidence that's needed to be a black conservative. And my last winner is Chief Westenberger, Jackie Charles, and the entire Kennesaw Police Department for their action towards bridging the gap between citizens and the police department. And I look forward to highlighting them in the upcoming Speak Georgia.
Kathy, your turn.
I just want to give a shout out to my winner, Mark Boyd and Casey Venning. They have been working with the Atlanta Water Boys for a while now, actually, but got some good attention from Bill Torpy this week. And if you're interested in helping them help the boys, go to their website, Helping Empower Youth. Just remember, Hey, H-E-Y. And they've got an Amazon list and some donations that they would like, and they're helping get these kids engaged safely off the streets.
They were my winners too. Thanks, Kathy. And Theron, we have about a minute left.
Thank you, Lori. My first winner is going to be State Patrol Officer Colonel Gary Vile. Colonel Vile, on the night that we were honoring Congressman Lewis, was so gracious to allow the people who remained in line to go pay their respects to Congressman Lewis. He and I had a very good conversation. We worked together to make sure people got a chance. Also want to thank Gerald Pilgrim from the Georgia Buildings Authority, Tim Fleming, who is the Chief of Staff for Governor Kemp, Nick Buford as well, and all the State Patrol officers who remained there all day long on that Wednesday until the wee hours of the night to make sure that people got a chance to see Congressman Lewis and that people were safe. And then lastly, I want to definitely make Congressman John Lewis a winner. He was a big fan of the show, and this is my last time giving him an opportunity to be a winner. And thank you so much.
All right, all those state officials did a great job, and we've lost 3 great men over the past 2 weeks. Former presidential candidate and radio talk show host Herman Cain, former civil rights icons C.T. Vivian, and Congressman John Lewis, all winners. Thank you all so much for joining us. We will see you again next week.